Welcome to the Multiply Your Success podcast, where each week we help growth-minded entrepreneurs and franchise leaders take the next step in their expansion journey. I'm your host, Tom Dufour, CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team, and as we open today, I'm wondering how you are building the enterprise value of your company, and what types of marketing and PR are you using to help create this enterprise value? Well, our guest today is Zack Fishman, and he shares with us some of the levers to pull to build your brand's enterprise value. Now, Zack has been involved in the franchise space since he could walk, literally, devoting his life to understanding all facets of the industry. Currently, Zack is the Chief Growth Officer of Fishman PR, the world's foremost PR firm specializing in franchising, and the Franchise Elevator, the world's preeminent emerging brands PR firm. In his spare time, Zack is also the co-founder of the Franchise Young Conference, which is the only conference for millennial and Gen Z franchise executives. He's the host of Modern Business Podcast, an award-winning podcast focusing on showcasing franchising's most exciting entrepreneurs, and is partner and COO of the Franchise Supplier Network, where he specializes in matchmaking franchisors which best fit suppliers. Now, Zack and I have known one another for many years in franchising, and so I'm so thrilled to be able to share his knowledge and expertise with you on this episode. You're going to love this podcast interview, so let's go ahead and jump right into it.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. So my name is Zack Fishman. I am the, amongst many things, the Chief Growth Officer for both Fishman PR and Franchise Elevator. Really excited to be on the show today. I'm normally used to doing my own podcast, been doing it for a long, long time. We're doing a bit of a home and home, so I'm excited to be on yours first. We got a lot to talk about today, so let's get into it, I suppose.
That sounds great. Well, and really, I think a big piece of our conversation, we were talking pre-show, and obviously we've known one another in franchising for a long time. It's really this idea of PR and understanding how to build value, I guess, for organizations. My experience has been with a lot of clients, emerging franchisors, and even growth-focused franchisors oftentimes view PR as more of a lead generation piece, and there's so much more to that. So I'd love just to open the conversation with it there and have you start filling in some gaps for us.
You're giving me a little bit of deja vu because I feel like that this is a conversation that I have a lot, but it's an important one. You know, when I first got into this business about 5.5 years ago, PR was starting to make the transition over from a lead generation activity into something that's more education centric. When the agency that my mother founded in 91 really first got its start, my father, who kind of came in not long after to really be the financial and sales engine of the agency, it was lead gen, because really it was, and there wasn't really a great way of tracking it, but that's just what it was known as. You would get an article somewhere in some newspaper and somebody would call you right at your corporate office. And that's just how it worked. And I think that over time, it has just evolved much more. The candidate journey has become a lot more complex. There's more touch points. You hear a lot about, and really like the dawn of digital marketing within the franchise development space. You heard a lot about just kind of like a new method of being able to put your name out there, but there wasn't really a lot of education and talk about SEO and what that really meant for a brand. And really, I guess, in layman's terms, it's really, kind of laying out the long and illustrious journey that a franchise prospect can have, and, the many stops that they have along the way. Rather that is reading an article or listening to a podcast or seeing an ad or going to a trade show. It's just gotten much more complex no matter what type of brand you are, industry or, size. But I think overall, that's something that has been an education piece for me, and it's been a lot of time spent on my end is really just explaining to even the most sophisticated of prospects how PR is looked upon today and how it's measured. It's really changed a lot, and really its prominence in the industry has changed a lot too, just in terms of, what it does for a brand, no matter if they're just getting started and they've never told their story before, or if they're a brand that's been owned by 3 different private equity firms in the past 10 years, right? So it doesn't really matter. It's just changed for everybody.
That's a great point. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of those maybe specifics, how things have changed and what's different from several years back, which you talked a little bit about where it was transitioning from this lead generation idea to where it is today. So what are some of those maybe oftentimes marketers, right? They're looking for metrics. So maybe we talk through some of the metrics that maybe have changed in terms of how you gauge what success might look like.
Yeah, so I think that really in the early 2000s, you saw this massive rise in online marketing, really, quote unquote, whether that was a portal or that was an ad through Google or at the time AOL. There was a lot of advertising with a lot of the with a lot of the print advertising that you were seeing normally. They were bringing it online, like an Entrepreneur and USA Today. That was really the start, was just trying to get people to be found in more places than just the newspaper or on a radio spot or on a TV, on a commercial or whatever it was. And I think over time, that has evolved a ton where it's not just about ad value, which was often how a lot of PR was measured, was based off of the ad value of a hit, aka, how valuable that was and how much an advertiser would maybe pay for that. It's a really old school metric that is still used a little bit today. But now I would say the difference between digital marketing and content marketing and PR, a lot of that has collapsed a ton. You've seen a lot of the industry consolidate a little bit. There's been some acquisitions between my competitors and some mergers between my competitors. And in large part, that is just due to the fact that the industry is kind of becoming one thing where it's more important to be an integrated marketing agency than to be just, a jacket, to be doing one thing really well. We've done that through partnerships and not through actually formal mergers, but everybody in some semblance has really done that. And I think that's in large part due to the fact that it's really hard to track PR without actually understanding and owning or being in partnership with the person who is running your digital experience, especially on the franchise development side. It's a very nuanced world and it's very, very tough to do it without it. And so a lot of the reporting metrics we look to are through SEO reporting, that a lot of these digital marketing agencies are spending a lot of time spinning up for you. It's about how long you're actually spending on the website versus before you were actually, working through PR. How, it could be anything even, around, effectiveness of the ads and potentially utilizing some of the things that we're securing, for some of our clients and how often those are actually being clicked through. It's about, number. It can be in some cases actually all about, just deal velocity and the average deal length and how long that's taking and is that decreasing? Because if your candidate is going to be more, understanding of what your brand is all about, generally speaking, that means that they're spending less time in the sales process because they have more of an understanding and education as to who you are as a brand. And I would say, subjectively speaking, it's always, always, always very helpful to be able to answer objections as well with brands. And so if you feel like that people are asking you less questions in the sales process because maybe they're being answered through PR, that's a really, really helpful metric to be able to track too. And there are some things and over the years that a lot of people have worked very hard to, bring some quantitative to my industry. And I would say most importantly, it's really competitive analysis through the media. So what they do is you take kind of like you take a score of what the actual placement has garnered through, SEO reporting and Google Analytics and all of that stuff. And then you're actually attributing a score to that and they're measuring that score, that combined score with your competitors. So for instance, if you're a pizza concept, Marco's Pizza, and you're looking to compare against Domino's and Papa John's and Pizza Hut, then you're taking a lot of media that you have that is business centric and you're really comparing that combined score against them to really figure out who is actually owning the media landscape for that particular category. So there's a lot of things that have advanced a ton, but I'll say it is still a little bit murky. But when you are working with an agency, like we have a couple of really amazing partners, across all different, investment levels. I would say the more that you're investing, to generally the more data that you have as things go.
thinking of it from the perspective of there's the franchisor that kind of has two pieces oftentimes that they're looking for, maybe even three, but one for many, especially for growth-oriented franchise systems. With new franchisees, you have your franchise development or recruitment focus. You have the focus of just promoting the brand at large in terms of just getting word out about your company or the general services that your franchise network provides. And then I think of it from the local franchisees' perspective. Your local franchisees are looking to grow their local business and their local presence. So how does all of that, and there may be other dynamics I'm not even mentioning here, but I think of those big three at least that pop into my mind. How do you help fit all of that into what you're describing and talking about here?
Yes, I think it really depends on the industry within franchising that you're in. The first and foremost, a lot of brands, really the lifeblood of what they do is two things. It's making sure your franchisees are successful, and it's making sure that you're growing as a brand, right? You're growing your footprint across the country or in the world in some cases. And so it's partially informed off of that. And where I always start is the franchise development side. So understanding, what type of candidate they're looking for, that really informs how they play with each other. So for brands that are looking for that multi-unit, multi-brand operator, more often than not, their customer is going to be a very, very, very different person than the person that they're looking to get as a candidate. And so the consumer side, aka, on the local, when a location is opening or on an ongoing basis on behalf of the franchisees, or just from a national brand perspective, you're really often finding in those cases that strategy is quite different. You are looking to, in a lot of ways, brands like that often don't utilize PR quite as much or quite as heavy on an ongoing basis. It's either A, they utilize it very little, or B, they are utilizing it super heavily with a lot of different campaigns, and they have a really robust calendar. Food and beverage is the best example of that you find, is that food and beverage always has something going on, always has an LTO going on. But you often find that in many instances, people who have a bigger investment level and are looking for a more sophisticated franchisee, it's either, they have a really sophisticated department and they have a really, really full consumer calendar, or they do next to nothing at all because they're really focusing on the growth side. For brands that it's a little bit more, the candidate the candidate that you would have as a franchisee is your customer. I would say it's a lot more of a gray area. You're often finding that brands are doing that together. Those are the brands that, in a lot of ways, that's what Fishman PR was built on in many senses. And same with our emerging brands agency, Franchise Elevator. Many of those brands are in personal care. They're reliant on discretionary spending. We're going to see how those brands do in the next year-ish or so. But overall, a lot of those candidates often end up times being their customer. And so you're finding that those calendars in terms of what we are, putting out there and what we are thinking through in terms of strategy and what we're reaching out to the media often blends together a little bit more, no matter if it's a national or a regional effort. It's a great question to ask, but I would say the one thing that, is becoming more du jour over the years is that there's been instances in which it's been really, really hard to hire specialized talent, especially, but talent just in general. So a lot of people are doing almost employee relations or employee recruitment, public relations as well. And it's almost looked at as a completely different avenue for them to really present themselves not only as a great brand to invest in as a franchisee, not only a great brand to invest your discretionary income into, but it's a great brand to work for too. And so that's just another added facet that we find. But overall, I would say it depends on the candidate, on the actual prospect itself and what the brand is thinking through and what their goals are.
One of the things that I'm curious to get your opinion on, and it's something you brought to my attention, which is this concept of enterprise value for a business, an organization, and in our world, a franchise organization. How does what you do and this broad concept of PR and publicity, how does this impact the value there, the enterprise value of an organization?
Yeah, so in much the same way that you're trying to present yourself in the most positive light for a potential customer or a potential candidate, you're doing the same for investors as well in many cases. And so a lot of the work that we've been, spending a lot of time on, and especially in the past 10 years or so as the space has become more professionalized, is just to look for ways to be able to create positive velocity from an investor standpoint too. And so there's a couple of ways that we've done that. Spotlighting the leadership team, that they're folks that they can actually trust, is a really big piece of what we do. Discussing some of the franchisees that have actually made the brand who they are is a really big impact, is a really big thing that we want to discuss. Really showcasing the technological sides of the brand and discussing how they are nimble as it relates to what's happening in the world of technology is a really big piece. And that's something that many brands, rather they build their own or they're buying things off the shelf, spend a lot of time doing, because private equity loves the idea of a brand that has the ability to be nimble and change on a dime, especially when they're the ones telling you to do that. That's a really big deal. And I would say the two others have to do with what's going on in the world, right? So, how pertinent or how relevant is your brand? That speaks to the total addressable market that a brand could have. And, a lot of investors are really trying to measure a brand based off of how long can it capture the fever of the US, and B, does it even capture it at all in the first place, right? So they don't really want fad exposed brands. They want brands that have staying power. And so being able to speak to what's happening in the news and, the demand differentiation for a brand is a really big piece of that. And in some ways, a lot of investors spend a lot of time thinking through, how connected a brand is to the community overall. And so that community aspect for some investors, I'm not saying all, but some, means a lot to them. So showcasing what they do and ensuring that they are ingrained in the local communities as much as possible, and showcasing stories behind that, is a really big piece. And I would say the last thing is really the numbers behind the brand, right? So really talking about a lot of the things that a brand can do. Of course, there's certain things that you can't mention when it comes to numbers, but you know, really highlighting again the success of a brand and the ways that one can, either through the mouthpiece of a franchisee or whatever it might be, is a really great way for us to showcase what a brand can actually do, and that it would be a good investment for a PE firm or a strategic platform or a family office to get involved in.
How can someone reach out to you and find out about what you're doing?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways. I would say the best way is probably to email me just at zfish, so ZFISH at fishmanpr.com. I am really prolifically posting on LinkedIn, so definitely feel free to reach out to me there, and I'd be happy to, engage with you further. And, really through my LinkedIn, the number one thing that, I've been spending a lot of time on over the years is that my business partner and I have a newsletter that we have been running for quite a while that has a lot of my musings in there as well as his, in terms of my outlook. And it's often intertwined with my personal life as well. I'm not really that great at getting out and kind of doing an elevator pitch, because I find it to be a bit inauthentic. So this is a bit of a different muscle for me. But I would say that, I really like to infuse my personal life as much as possible into what I do. I live and breathe a family business every day. So franchising is my family, and family is franchising to me. And they often have quite a blurry line there. So those are really the places you can reach out to learn more about me and what I do on a day to day.
Well, Zach, this is a great time in the show, and we make a transition. We ask every guest the same 4 questions before they go. And the first question we ask is, have you had a miss or two on your journey and something you learned from it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that the big miss that I would say that I had was I I think in my first job, I really looked around at my colleagues and felt like what their behavior was something that I, should obviously adopt. I was a 22-year-old kid. I didn't really know what I didn't know. And I had all this institutional knowledge on franchising because I grew up in it, but I didn't really know how to be a professional. And so what I teach my people is that there is no reason for you to look around and just do what everybody else is doing. You need to set your own path and chart your own path and be your own person, and, set the standard for yourself and not allow others to set it for you. I have, notoriously crazy work ethic, but it wasn't really always that way. I was somebody who, was honestly a little bit lazy in my first job. I won't lie. And I think that that was partially because I felt like it was okay because a lot of other people around me were that way. There was a lot of transitions in a company and, I felt like, this isn't my problem. This is just the world kind of telling me that I can just kind of kick back and, you know, let things come to me. But in the reality, which I would quickly learn, which I'll get into in your next question, I learned very quickly that I needed to take the world by the collar and, and really, try my best to put my own imprint on it.
Well, the next question is the flip side of that, right? Taking a look at a make or a highlight you'd like to share.
Yeah, so going into that, I think that in my next gig, which is really where I met you for the first time, I spent a lot of time looking at the mirror and trying to think of what I really wanted to be when I grew up, right? I was a 24 turning 25-year-old kid when I first got started with my next role. And I thought to myself, I wanted to find something I was a little bit more passionate about. I think that was A. But B, the biggest thing is I wanted to find something that was going to be hard. I wanted to build. I wanted to learn what it was like to, put blood, sweat, and tears into something and to really see success. I hadn't really felt like I had had success quite yet. I had closed 2 deals up until that point at my old job, which was a way bigger sales, way larger sales cycle, but it just didn't feel fulfilling to me. And so I went to basically the best way to do that, which was a technology that basically had absolutely no customers up until that point. And I, for lack of a better word, worked my ass off and really learned how to do customer segmenting, how to actually speak to somebody on the phone in the real way and actually understand, how to sell properly. I went through a lot of sales schooling with a lot of franchising's most wonderful resources. There was all these things. I put a lot of work into myself to really understand who I wanted to be today. And I think that experience, as I like to say, was my MBA. I didn't get in a proper MBA, but that was really the way that I learned, what I wanted to be when I grew up, what type of salesperson I was going to be, what type of executive I was going to be. It was really informative for me and was the most wonderful learning experience. And so, that was a major win and really prepared me to play nice in the sandbox with everybody, no matter if I'm related to them or not.
That's great. Well, let's talk about a multiplier that you've used to multiply yourself personally, professionally, or organizations you've run.
So I think that the biggest thing that I've done is that I'm a list maker, right? I'll be honest in that. Like I am somebody who has a list for absolutely everything in their life. My fiance often makes fun of me that, every single time that somebody in her life is looking for something, she just sends them to me because I'm always going to be prepared to give somebody my opinion or an answer. I think that I would say that my multiplier is that those lists allow me to be the ultimate connector. I'm always prepared for whatever is coming my way, especially in franchising. Rather, it's somebody who's looking for a job in the franchise development space, but they only want to be using brokers as their primary lead generation source. I have it all segmented out based off of that. If a private equity firm is looking for, a very particular type of brand and they're looking to get some subjective due diligence from somebody about the brand and what the executives are like within a very particular industry, call it infrared sauna. I know all 4 of the brands that are there, all organized in a little spreadsheet, and I know exactly who to speak to, and I have all the information on that. If it's a piece of technology that somebody's looking for, like real estate mapping technology, and they want to know the differences between all of those things, I have it all very neatly organized. But all my entire life is really around the idea of being the most prepared that one humanly can. And I spend a lot of time on that. And it's a lot of updating and making sure that everything is organized in the way that is both digestible to me, but also I always pretend that what I have in terms of my list can be understood by anybody. If they have no context into franchising, they can just pick it up and they'll know exactly what it's all about. So there's no, shorthand in there that only I would understand. It's all something that anybody can use. And so that's my biggest multiplier, I think, is just really being organized and having things segmented out as much as humanly possible. And that's the hard part, right? It's very hard to do that in the moment. but I always take the time to make sure that everything is updated and everything is in tip-top shape for even, my grandma, if she decided to look at it, she would kind of have an idea of what it was all about.
I did not know that about you. I know you're the connected guy, right? I know you're connected and know lots of folks as a go-to, but that just reinforces. When in doubt, reach out to Zack. He probably knows somebody. So I love it. Well, the final question we ask every guest is, what does success mean to you?
I think about this question a lot because I think that as I'm moving and changing in I'm really turning a chapter in my life very, very soon here. As by the time this comes out, I probably will have done so already. But I think that you look at the world a little bit differently. And I often used to look at success, when I was younger as just making a lot of money. And I think that now I look at success as being able to find the perfect balance between spending time with the people I love most and being able to support them in the way that they deserve to be supported. So I think that answer has just changed a ton to me. I don't really have a lot of interest or care all that much about being first on the list as it relates to hosting the events I host, or being the person that people know when it comes to X, Y, and Z, as previously discussed in the last question. The entire reason I do all of those things is to make sure that, I'm able to build up the enterprise value for myself. And I'm able, and that in turn, if I get to a certain point, will allow me to be able to, improve and spend more time on the relationships that matter most to me, right? And people in franchising do matter a lot to me, right? There are people that not only are colleagues, they're not only people I work with and clients, but they're, lifelong friends in a lot of ways, looked at as really brothers and sisters that just happen to be born to different mothers and fathers, right? And I think that just goes to show how important franchising is to me. And I don't look at it as black and white where I turn off my personal brain and I turn on my professional brain every day. It's very much, combined. I have one cell phone with the same number for every person, but that's really what success looks like to me in the long term, is being able to, be a successful person, but also at the same time successful enough that will allow me to be able to spend the time with my family that I want indeed.
Wonderful. And as we bring this to a close, Zack, is there anything you were hoping to share or get across that you haven't had a chance to yet?
I would say nothing in particular. I think that the one thing that I didn't talk about quite enough that would be probably pretty important to discuss is that I think that the rush towards the space becoming more professionalized has forced a lot of people to look at what they do every day and figure out how they're actually helping to raise the bar for the brands that are in our industry of franchising. And I think that PR is not really the only place where this is happening. It's happening in, it could be, the types of people that you're hiring. It could be the types of technology you're putting into place. It could be anything, right? It could be the events that you're attending. There's all sorts of lenses that you can put through this idea of enterprise value. So I encourage everybody to really think through, what they do every day. Rather, it's if you're a brand and you're looking to find ways to build up your enterprise value, look at the entire picture and not just at your tech stack, at the people, but it's about the service providers that you have and the places that you spend your time and things like that. Like everything should be under the lens of that, in my perspective. And so that's really what the 2020s has been all about, is just the idea of looking to, what I view as happiness for myself personally is what a lot of people should view their businesses through as it relates to a lens, is that, how can I make my business so successful that I have the ability to spend all the time in the world that I could humanly want, with the people that I care about most, right? So I think that matters for business owners and on a personal level too.
Zack, thank you so much for a fantastic interview. And let's go ahead and jump into today's 3 key takeaways. So takeaway number 1 is when Zack talked about how PR has changed and is changing. And I really liked how he said digital marketing and content marketing and PR are all consolidating into one type of new form of marketing. and it's creating strategic relationships, acquisitions, and other opportunities. So I really liked how he talked about this kind of converging, kind of almost like three rivers converging into one, where they're all blending together. Takeaway number 2 is when he talked about the enterprise value for an organization and how you can help support that through PR. And he said, in the way in which you present yourself to potential franchise buyers or potential franchisees, you're also presenting yourself in that way to potential investors or potential suitors that might invest in your franchise company or buy your franchise company years down the line. And so he said that their firm does this by highlighting management teams, community involvement, and other avenues he discussed. Takeaway number 3 is when he shared his multiplier, and I loved it. It was so simple and yet so profound. He talked about that he is a list maker and has lists for everything in his life. Checklists, sorting lists, contact lists. It sounds great. So, and it sounds like he might be the most connected guy in franchising, which is a pretty great position to be in. So he might be someone to reach out to if you need a contact. Now it's time for today's win-win. So today's win-win comes from the end of the episode when Zack talked about the rush in franchising to become more, quote, professionalized, unquote. And he said this is happening across franchising, and this rush to become professionalized is raising the bar for franchising in general. So I think it's just a great little nugget and takeaway, because it's going to be a win for you as the franchisor if you begin professionalizing sooner rather than later. For example, hiring an organization like mine, like Big Sky Franchise Team, to help you professionalize your operation when you get into franchising instead of trying to, quote, figure it out on your own, unquote. Or working with other professionals in the space to help accelerate that professionalization. It's not to say that you won't get there, but working with other consultants and so on can help you get there a little more quickly. And so that's the episode today, folks. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast and give us a review. And remember, if you or anyone you know might be ready to franchise their business or take their franchise company to the next level, please connect with us at bigskyfranchiseteam.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to having you back next week.